Hello music lovers, welcome to episode 79 of What Makes This Song Special. A very special episode. For the first time on the channel, I'm delighted to announce a partnership. This is a first for me on the channel, which is very exciting. So today's episode is sponsored by Gazzetta Clothing, which is a very relevant brand for today's episode, as they're a company who makes stylish, modern clothes and accessories, all based around the theme of the great era of Italian football, which we're going to speak about today. Maybe the greatest era of football ever in general, and we can debate that in a moment or in the comments. So like this beautiful Del Piero top that I'm wearing today, there are also hoodies, vests, mugs, phone cases, bags with Maldini, Vialli, Baggio, Baresi, Signori, Totti, all the greats of that era. And I'll also be giving you a wee discount code at the end of the episode for anyone who wants to check out the merchandise on Gazzetta Clothing. And I'll leave a link to the Gazzetta Clothing website in the notes down there below as well. So we'll talk more about them at the end, and I'll talk a wee bit about today. Now, as you all know, normally I would tell you a wee story from my life that I'm taken back to when I hear a particular song, and then I'll talk about that song and the singer, and then follow up with a cover version at the end that you can, on a separate video, that you can watch if you like. Hopefully you want to click on it and watch me do a cover version of the song, and that's the format of the show every week. This is definitely a story that will be relatable mostly to folk from my generation, but hopefully it resonates with everyone. Serie A of the 80s and 90s has almost become something of mythical folklore legend amongst even young people these days. I've heard my oldest son and his pals talking about the legends of Serie A and that era from just playing FIFA, and they're blown away that all of these elite legendary players all kind of played in the same league at roughly the same time, or many of them anyway. So I think it's easy sometimes to think, or maybe do I think this was the greatest era of football because it was the era when I was young and impressionable, and now I'm just getting old and things aren't as good as they were in my day, as old people always say, or was it just an amazing golden generation of football and footballers? So we can discuss that. But today we're going to go back to when I was probably about 12 years old, give or take a year or two. It was the early to mid 1990s, and it was the weekend, and school had closed for a couple of days, and the air was full of hope and excitement for the things that a weekend could bring. And the weekend brought football. It always brought football. And having spent much of my primary school childhood moving back and forward to Italy to live or to visit, I tried to explain to my school friends in Scotland what the passion of Italian football was like. About these legendary clubs like Juventus and AC Milan and Inter and Roma and Lazio, Napoli, Fiorentina, Parma, Sampdoria. The list goes on, and how grown men would debate and argue over morning coffee in bars about the games and the transfers and the tactics, and how there were 3 or 4 daily newspapers just dedicated to football. And my Scottish schoolmates just weren't really able to appreciate it. They'd heard of some of the teams, but it was pre-internet, pre-cable satellite TV. It was before the days of cheap flights. Most of my school pals had never even been abroad. And they couldn't envisage the world that I was painting for them with my experiences and stories. And you had to rely on a magazine or the odd clip that was shown on the news. And then in 1992, something magical happened. England's biggest and most famous footballer of that time was Paul Gascoigne, or Gazza as he was nicknamed. And Gazza had just been bought by Lazio, who are a Roman team, or one of the two main Roma teams, or teams from that region where my dad's from, Lazio. And this is a huge money deal, and the British media were keen to cover how their great product was getting on in his first season in the most glamorous league in the world. So everybody was quite excited. Gazza's been, an English players playing in Serie A. And there were a couple of other English or British players as well in Serie A at that time. But Gazza was the big poster boy for English football. And as I say, it was a big money deal to Lazio. So a television production company called Chrysalis had just made this documentary about Gazza. And they were keen to be the team that followed his career to Rome to sort of televise his experience to the British public. And they approached the Italian Football Federation to ask for the broadcasting rights for Lazio's games, but they were turned down as the FIGC were only interested in giving them any rights if they were going to broadcast all the Serie A games instead of just Lazio's. So Channel 4 ended up outbidding Sky, which was a huge deal at the time, to take the UK rights for Serie A, for the whole of Serie A. Now, meanwhile, James Richardson, who was working at Sky as a producer, he knew someone who worked at a small production company called, you guessed it, Chrysalis. And he was keen to see if he could get a job at Channel 4 to be a producer or the producer. And at the beginning, the job was really essentially a babysitting of Paul Gascoigne while they made this show out of seeing how Gazza was getting on in Italy. Nobody really knew how it was going to sort of explode into this humongous show that it did. And Richardson had previously had a relationship with an Italian girl and had subsequently learned how to speak Italian to a fairly good standard. So he got the job, but within a couple of weeks of them starting, as I said, just a kind of babysitting job to see how Gazza was getting on, James Richardson found himself being the presenter of the show, and the rest is history. What a show. I mean, it was just magical. It was entertaining both because of the incredible football, but also the humour, which was so well executed by James Richardson. And it made you dream. The show, it took you to little piazzas and in Italy looking at the sunshine and ice creams and the famous daily football newspapers that he would flick through and read excerpts from and translate them into English. And it showed a world that most of Britain hadn't seen before. And in a show that I don't think many Italians were even aware of it being a thing. I mean, most of my Italian friends and family will never have even known that show existed. But the whole of Britain was tuned into the Italian football. And for many years, everybody was just obsessed with, if you liked football, everybody was obsessed with, every Saturday morning you watched Gazzetta and you watched the reviews of the previous week's games, the previews of the upcoming games, and then on the Sunday you always had the lunchtime game. Sometimes you had a mezzanotte programme where they did the evening game for you, live football on a Sunday. And the British games, English and Scottish, weren't always televised. So if you wanted to watch live football, you were guaranteed live football every single week. And it was Italian football. It was Serie A, and everybody was just obsessed with it. It was amazing, and the programme covered all of those iconic moments that we all remember when we look back. The famous George Weah solo goal, the magic moments of Baggio, Vialli's overhead kicks, the advent of the career of my childhood hero, Alessandro Del Piero, the debut of a 16-year-old Gianluigi Buffon. These things provided excitement for our eyes every weekend, The goal machines like Batistuta, Ronaldo, as in Ronaldo R9, the original, Vieri, Inzaghi, Crespo, Asprilla, midfielders like Conte and Davids, Deschamps, Zidane, Ruud Gullit, Frank Rijkaard, Lothar Matthäus, Rui Costa, defenders like Maldini, Baresi, Ferrara, Andres Brema, Mihailovic, Costa Curta, eventually Cannavaro and Nesta a couple of years in. I mean, utterly ridiculous. Just such a golden generation of football. And there will be folk out there maybe watching. You can have this debate with me if you want, who will say, what about La Liga of the early 2000s, late 90s? What about the current Premiership, which has all the money at the moment in England? Obviously, great eras for those leagues, definitely. There's undoubtedly been other generations of amazing moments for leagues, but I don't think there's ever been the monopoly on great players like that of Serie A back then. It was a time when football had so much character. I love football. It's an obsession of mine, an absolute obsession. I still watch football almost every day. I read about it every day. It's the first thing I do in the morning. I get my coffee and I look at the transfer gossip and all that stuff. I'm that geek on football. But there's no doubt that some of the magic has been removed recently. And even though I still love it, it's become more about athleticism and physicality and less about individual skill and flair and character. And there's no risk taken anymore. It's all very tactical and calculated and careful compared to, what I think it was like when in that era when I was younger. And where I can't argue that the footballers now are faster, stronger, probably technically better, more professional. The opportunity to show that doesn't present itself, I don't think, in the same way in the modern game, that you have these moments of magic in most games where something could happen, somebody could turn a game just with some individual flair. And we can debate that in the comments if you want. If you're a big Premiership fan, a La Liga fan, and you think they've had better eras, let's have a debate. You'll lose, but we'll have a debate. But anyway, back to the story. Every week, the legend that was James Richardson, took us on this journey through the television screen of a land with sunshine and pastries and ice cream. He always had all these things laid out on the table for him with his newspaper. Beautiful people driving about in the background on Vespas and mopeds, living la vita bella. There was an allure, not just for the football, but for another culture. Some great banter, an escape from the kind of rainy grey skies of the UK when we looked out the window. And when me or any of my friends, when we talk about football when we were kids, that show is always mentioned by somebody in the conversation, and the whole conversation moves towards the nostalgia, the memories, the funny player interviews, and most importantly, of course, the football. A league that I just don't think will ever be surpassed. At its peak, Football Italia, that show was watched by nearly 3.5 million people every single Saturday morning in the UK, just in the UK. Just amazing. Really cool. And that was, back in the day when, I think those numbers probably would be even more now, given that more people have access to television channels and social media and all those things just in the palm of their hand on a phone. So incredible numbers. And then there's also that famous introduction that brought the excitement and anticipation of the show starting every Saturday and Sunday for the live games. And you heard that shout of golazzo or golaccio, which brought around so much confusion because no one ever really knew why that was used or what the word actually was. Well, it actually derived from Jose Altafini, who was a Brazilian-born Italian player. He'd played for AC Milan, Napoli and Juventus long before I was born. An absolute goal machine, an amazing footballer. And after he retired from football, Altafini eventually became a pundit on Sky TV, Sky Italia, which is where that word comes into play because he used to use it. The word that brought around so much confusion, it wasn't golazzo or golazio, as some people thought because of the links to Gaza, who was playing for Lazio at the time. They thought they'd maybe put that on the programme because it was supposed to be about the Brits watching their player playing in Italy. It was in fact golaccio, which was a Portuguese word that didn't even really translate to Italian. So even Italians like my dad at the time were kind of sort of confused by why that word was used, but that's how it came about. And then before Football Italia, the co-creator Steve Dubery was in a band called Definitive 2, whose only ever release was a 1992 song called I'm Stronger Now. And then Dubery took this along with the sample of Altafini shouting golaccio and the famous intro music and saying came together and were born. So if anyone ever wondered what that music and that kind of saying, where that's how that all came about. Now you probably think that's maybe the song that I'm going to cover this week, or maybe you looked at the title and realised that it's not. I was tempted. I was really tempted, and I looked at a way of sort of putting that song onto like piano or guitar and singing a cover version of it. It's very difficult because it's a kind of dance tune with lots of repetitive words and lyrics, and it's not really a song that I don't think would be that interesting. It's best as a dance song. It's not really that interesting as a piano cover. So, as always, there's a song that reminds me of that era. Probably a few songs, because that era did span quite a few years. But there is one particular song that reminds me of those Saturday mornings or those Sunday afternoons watching the programme with my brothers and my mum and dad, or pals that would come round to the house, and we'd all watch the Italian football. And it was always in between the show, on half-time or whatever, and it would go to the adverts. And at the time, there was this iconic Levi's jeans advert, and I just started kind of high school. I was in first or second year of high school, really into my rock music, into Guns N' Roses and Bon Jovi and Aerosmith and all that stuff. And there was this great rock song called Inside by a band called Stiltskin, and it was used on this iconic Levi's jeans advert. It was a really cool advert. I think it was like in black and white, and it was just a really cool ad. And it's one of those awesome moments for a sort of fairly unknown band at the time, where a famous company came in and used one of their songs in a huge worldwide advert, and they were thrust into the limelight overnight. Sadly, it was their only major hit, but such an awesome track, like just an amazing rock track that would have been absolutely up there with some of the best rock tracks of that era. If it had been released by Guns N' Roses or somebody at the time, it would have still been one of their best songs as well. It was an amazing song, but a bit of a one-hit wonder, unfortunately for them. But one that takes me back to being that age, watching Serie A in its golden generation. Just great memories. And as always, I would normally do a vocal coach analysis of the singer's voice. And the truth is that this week I just haven't had time to really do my homework on the singer. As I said, it was a bit of a one-hit wonder. I don't know that much about Ray Wilson's voice, other than just hearing this track. So rather than a deep analysis of vocal technique, I'm going to give you a bit of music trivia. It's quite an interesting little, a little bit of music trivia. The singer of the song Inside was Stiltskin's frontman Ray Wilson, as I said, originally from Dumfries in the south of Scotland. And a lot of people think that he just disappeared into oblivion when Stiltskin finished, but he actually ended up being the lead singer in Genesis. Yes, the Genesis. After Phil Collins officially announced his departure in 1996. The other members that were left were Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford. They were handed a CD of the Stiltskin album, The Mind's Eye, and they were really impressed with Wilson's vocal abilities and range, and they brought him in for an audition, and the rest, as they say, is history. So he became the singer in Genesis. I think they released one album with him as the singer, and did a couple of tours and things like that. So he was in the band for a while. But anyway, that's all I can really tell you about Wilson and his vocal prowess. But obviously a great singer. But yeah, today's been more just about, rather than about the music and about the singer, it's just been more about the football, another one of my favourite topics. So I hope you enjoyed our little chat about football and music. And, as promised, if you'd like to take a look at the Gazzetta Clothing and jog down memory lane with some purchases of classic Serie A merch, you can get a special 20% discount for watching the show today if you use RICO20, so RICO 20, the number 20 in the voucher box at the checkout. You'll get 20% off. I will leave the link for Gazzetta Clothing website and the discount voucher code in the text underneath the video so that you can make use of that. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Please leave some comments underneath. If you agree or disagree with me saying it's the greatest league of all time, then that would be great to have a wee debate with you. Also, just if you want to just remind me of some players and teams I might have left out there, I'm sure I left out many players because there were so many players, great legendary players that played in Serie A in that era. I could talk about it forever. But yes, leave me some comments, please. Click here or here, wherever the video comes up. Part 2, I'm going to cover Stiltskin inside on piano, which will be unusual. I haven't planned it yet, so after this I'll record it and see what it's like. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.